Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today with Yamaha's R7. This is the full power version, so this is the version that most places in the world are going to be getting. It's not the restricted or A2 version for new riders. However, you can definitely see this bike does have some nods at the more beginner or basic rider orientated kind of niche of the market. It sits somewhere between the 650s, the sport 650s, and the full super sport machines. And some people will say, well, only 75 horsepower, the super sports have 130, that's not too good, doesn't have the electronics as well. However, that is reflected in the price. The full power version is 15 on the road here in Australia. I'll chuck the American and UK pricing up on the screen as a point of comparison. This is very much a value-driven machine. Now, over the MT-07, which has been criticised by some people for having, basic suspension and brakes and things like that, the thing to keep in mind is that bike is very much built to a budget, and the R7, while it takes it up a step, is also built to a budget. Now, it's got the fully adjustable forks on the front, rebound and preload adjustable shock on the rear, 4-pot calipers on 298mm rotors, so not super impressive. It does have ABS. S22 tyres is standard. We've got obviously that great Yamaha sports bike styling, which takes a bit of styling from, the R6 and the R1. And in many ways, this bike is designed as, I would say, a very capable, proper sports bike. So unlike the 650s, it's got the full sports bike ergo. So it's got the clip-on bars, which are quite low. It's got the rear sets. The seating position on it is very, very aggressive. It's a proper super sport style machine as far as the seating position. So if you want a sports bike, this is the one which I would say is very road orientated, gives the full super sport ergo, but also is definitely built around an engine which is much more aimed at road use. Now, you might be thinking, well, did they just chuck the MT-07, that CP2 engine, in the R7 and basically just, chuck some fairings on it? Not at all. It's a very different application of the engine, I would say. So compared to the MT-07 and the T7, it's got quite a light flywheel effect. It's got, the same throttle response, which was very, very good. The torque feels like it's available everywhere. It's not quite as punchy as the MT-07 or the T7. However, in comparison, it's a little bit more linear and the top end is a lot better, where on the MT-07, the top end kind of tapers off, and the T7 is definitely very, very torque based, and they've kind of made it meatier. Whereas on this, it's freer flowing, really nice engine characteristic. It's got a bit of a mechanical whir to it, which lets you know what's going on. The exhaust note is pretty quiet. There's not a lot going on there. Definitely needs an aftermarket exhaust if you like an exhaust note on your bike, and that will definitely help. But as I said, this is very much a machine which, I guess, it's not a super sport machine in the traditional sense. It doesn't have the really peaky engine. Certainly the cost of entry is a lot lower. But to me, having owned a Daytona 675, where I bought that bike because the mid-range torque and the low-down torque was a lot better than the other super sports, I would say the R7 is going to do that even better. The throttle response in traffic and things like that, when you're at a stop and you're doing stop-start, really nice, really good low-down torque, very easy to ride, very easy to jump onto. It's not that different in weight to most of the super sports, but for whatever reason, it feels like it carries that weight a lot lighter. It feels like a really light machine, both pushing it around, but also when it comes to the actual handling of the bike, it feels very, very light, where I find a lot of the super sport and the super bike machines, they feel quite heavy and quite stodgy for whatever reason. Obviously, once you're riding them hard, that changes, but as far as, the low speed stuff where you're struggling with the steering lock and everything like that, the R7 seems like a much better proposition, which I was really, really impressed by, particularly because on a spec sheet side of things, the weight of the R7 isn't really that different than most of the super sport machines. Now, I'm going to do a full review, but to give you a really basic rundown, I've talked about the engine characteristic and that handling, light, easy. It's just like the MT-07. It's a bike you can jump onto and immediately feel very at home, and it's very easy to ride. The brakes, there's not enormous bite, but there's good power, very nicely balanced for the rest of the bike. The front end felt quite well set up for me. The only thing I will say, my first impression of the rear shock was I was actually getting bounced out of the seat over some of the harsher bumps, so Certainly, I feel like the rear suspension is probably the weakest point on the bike so far, in my opinion, just from the couple of rides I've done, but I'll give a more in-depth look in the full review as to my long-term thoughts on that. But apart from that, it's a really cool machine. I think the day of the super sports is over. They're just not really a super viable machine for the road, which is what most people seem to be looking for these days. The R7, having the MTO7 or the CP2 engine in it, it's a really nice engine. It's really tractable, it's really flexible. The way it puts power to the ground is beautiful. It's not gonna have the top end, but certainly I think it's just a better road engine. And this would probably be the bike that I'd like to be on at a track day, because like I said, I really like that MTO7 engine. I feel like it's an easy engine to get the most out of and to have a lot of fun on. And again, while it perhaps doesn't have quite the same thrill level as a traditional super sport, and certainly not like something like a super bike with 200 horsepower, the way it delivers that power, you make the fun, and that's going to be rewarding. Other features, Brembo master cylinder, cool styling, very much the sports bike ergo in the 835mm seat height. That's pretty normal. It's quite narrow between the legs, which kind of offsets that, but I'm a 32-inch inseam, 180cm rider, and that's just about right for me for a sports bike, and very similar to most of the super sports and super bikes. As far as the other features, we do have a TFT display, which is nice to see. Good bit of wind protection. Definitely kind of getting in behind the fairing does help a lot there. It's very much just a typical sports bike in that regard. LED light, LED indicators, LED tail light, really nice tail on it, really sporty tail. It looks the business. I mean, obviously this is just my first impressions, but I would definitely say for someone looking for a nice, proper sports bike, this is probably, if you're not caught up on the electronics and you want a bike you can really flog and make the most of, where, some machines, you're only ever using 30%. I think the R7 on first impressions is definitely going to deliver there. And it's quite different. It's probably the closest competitor to the RS660. But I would say even the RS660 has so much performance on offer that in some ways, I think the R7 having a little bit less power makes it a little bit easier to make use of all that power, which that's not going to be for everyone, but for someone like me, that's my preference. Anyway, stay tuned for the full review. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to sub, hit that notification bell, or support me on Patreon. As always, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.